Does Kyle Shanahan bear any responsibility for the 49ers' unreal rash of injuries this season? Whoever wants to start, go ahead.
I can start off. I think there's always a little responsibility on the head coach just for everything, but I don't know if it's like blame Kyle. Like if there was a different head coach here, it'd be anything different. Sometimes teams just get the injury bug, and it's been 2 years in a row. I feel like the 49ers have been one of the most injured teams in the NFL, and we'll see if it
3 years in a row.
Yeah, 3 years in a row. We'll see if it changes in this next fourth year.
Yeah.
Yeah, he is. Because that Deebo Samuel play, I was still curious. I think I tweeted immediately. I was like, why is Deebo still out there? You guys are up like 3 scores. So I know why he was out there. He just wanted to curb stomp Belichick just because, like, yeah, let's go. I went to your house. I beat the genius, stuff like that. And he respects him. You know, in the same way Belichick respects him, because Belichick had like actual praise for an opposing coach for once. So that's how I see it right there. Someone, I think Jack said it with Nick yesterday, like, oh, what about George Kittle? And I didn't think about that. I was like, that's a good point too. They weren't blown out, but was that? No, yeah, that was a good point. So I think you got to at least credit him for the Debo one, and then other ones off the top of my head I can't remember. But yeah, I think so. You have to at least credit to that and gameplay wise, because practice wise, I think that's a different story.
One other thing.
Go ahead.
Oh, well, Dre Greenlaw, remember earlier in the year, he got hurt on special teams, I think against the Jets or the Giants when the game was pretty much out of hand too. So like when you're up 2-3.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Also the Debo one. I mean, it was 3rd and 8 and they were running. Like you're not trying to pick up a first down. Why don't you give that ball to freaking Jerick McKinnon? But anyway, okay. Who's next?
I am. I'm going to do magic and talk with my mouth closed right now.
I love that.
So,
Frozo over here.
So, basically, it's hard for me to throw any blame on Shanahan. I understand it's 3rd and 8, but it's a hamstring. Hamstrings are weird. I pull my hamstrings like 5 times a day just bending down to tie my shoe, but that's a different story. I don't put much blame on Shanahan because you can never predict injuries. You can never prevent injuries. It's just one of those things that come and go. So
shut up, Grant.
I would put more blame on, say, the training staff for not checking out the heels the spikes with that turf at MetLife. I don't think that's a responsibility of Shanahan's. That would be more on the training staff. And Mav, turn off your alarm.
It wasn't.
But
wasn't me either.
But hey, look, I'm talking again. But I would say more on the training staff than it would be on Shanahan.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jack.
I got a couple of different ways to go. The first one, I think Jose already hit on that, and that was kind of what Nick brought up yesterday, and that's kind of the direction that I was first thinking of was, the Deebo Samuel deal, there was no reason for him to be on the field at that point in the game. There was the Kittle thing kind of at the end of the Seahawks game. Neither one of those situations are really terrible because you're still early in the fourth quarter in both of those. So, but I can understand why that would be an issue. The other thing that I would take this to is the way that they're practicing in training camp. Are they getting the players ready for the contact?
Yeah.
I'm not at the game. I'm not at practice during training camp. I've never been able to be there since way back in the 80s, back up in the Rockland days. But from what I understand, there's not a whole lot of contact and full speed taking them to the ground hitting.
Not a lot. There's zero.
Yeah. And if you go back to something that Dante Whitner said early in the season, he talked about how with Harbaugh, it was all about ramping up their bodies for contact to get their body used to the collisions that they're going to take throughout the year. And if you're not doing that, I don't understand how you're going to be able to go into a game and play 16 weeks without having some problems.
It's really interesting that Whitner said that. You want to go ahead? I have something to say. Go ahead.
No, it's just quick. Just remind me of what Jack said about the Patriots game. Wasn't that tight end day? And George Kittle was on the record saying, "Oh, it's great when you get the day off on your own holiday." So that just proves that he does pull. I don't know if that was before or after though the Debo injury. But the point is, whatever it was, it's like, all right, so now you acknowledge you were supposed to pull them out, or you just didn't. So that one's something that you got to go back to. And the second one, Jack, that's perfect. Yeah, exactly. You need to ramp up your body. I mean, I think even some UFC fighters like Nate Diaz, he gets his body beat up right before he goes into fight. So that's how I guess that just works out for these guys.
Yeah, didn't you guys see Happy Gilmore? Happy Gilmore gets cut from the hockey team. He goes to the batting cage, and he just takes shots to the face. I mean, he's getting ready. No, seriously, I've never played football. I played baseball, so I don't know about this. But I did listen. I covered Harbaugh, and he would talk about this. It's so interesting, Jack, that you mentioned Whitner, because I was going to mention this too. There was a phrase that Harbaugh had. I believe it was contact callus. You have to build up your contact callus, like the calluses you have on your hands from lifting weights or things like that. Like you honestly have to build it up. And he would think about that in practice. They wouldn't have live hitting every day, but they absolutely had multiple sessions in training camp of live hitting at the goal line, live scrimmages. No, it wouldn't always be starters, but they would have it. And the thing is, maybe you don't need it every year. Maybe that's a little old school, but in a season with no preseason, that would have been the only live hitting you would have had before the first week of the season. And you've seen all these players go down with high ankle sprains, contact injuries. Maybe they didn't build up the freaking callus, whatever that means, that Jim Harbaugh was talking about and Dante Whitner was talking about. Yeah, I think there's something to that. It's tough, though, because the Niners had injuries in camp, and they're trying to not get people hurt. I mean, a lot of guys got hurt in camp. It's a tough position. But I see where Kyle's coming from. I see where Harbaugh was coming from. And maybe the Harbaugh style would have been more suited, would have been better for the 2020 COVID year, considering the cancellation of preseason.
That's why high school, too, they have double days. It gets you ready for all that strain and that beat up for like those 3 to 4 days or however many. I don't know how they're doing it nowadays, but that was always my interpretation of it is like for those 2-3, double days. Hey, this is the best you're going to feel before you practice now. Come get beat up.
Also, it felt like a lot of the major injuries the Niners had were weeks 1 and 2, like right away. George Kittle, week 1, Nick Bosa, week 2. They never really got out of the gates this season. It was a really weird season. I guess it was no one had ever seen anything like it, but I don't think the Niners necessarily prepared themselves as well as other teams. But I didn't cover the other teams. I don't know what they did.
Also, it's when they had their off season. Their off season is to train, to be physically better, to be more conditioned, not necessarily take a train wreck of hits. That's not what the offseason's about for these players.
Right.
So now they go in, they have 28 days to prepare for the season, and in those 28 days, they're not doing full contact tackling. Actually, McKinnon got really upset that, who was it? Fred Warner tackled him too hard in practice. So it's just, that's just part of it. You had 28 days to get ready for a season, and you did no tackling.
Yeah. And there was no preseason, and you just went from 0 to 100. And that's what happens. I mean, you pull hamstrings, you get broken bones, you have high ankle sprains. That's what happens. So I guess there was no template to follow, but they didn't. What, Jack?
Well, I was just going to say, even if we just take this back even further back, I mentioned the Rockland days with the 49ers under Walsh, and Walsh was notorious for having really light practices as the season went on, and that was one of the things that people give him a lot of credit for with keeping his players healthy. But having been there and watched those practices, I know that those were full speed rock'em sock'em practices, and I can remember standing there watching a goal line drill and just they're just pounding people. I know it's NFL different, but they're going at it, and that's Ronnie. You're talking about Ronnie Lott and Joe Montana and Roger Craig. And
the idea is if you can do the full speed tackling at the goal line because people aren't running from 10 yards away and giving full. It's like it's slower collisions, but it's still real football. The Niners never do that, never. And Bill Walsh, if he were alive and he was watching practice, I'm sure he would say, "What is this? It's not how I would do training camp." Also, if Jim Harbaugh were there, he would be like, what do you expect your team to look like week 1 if this is how you're going to do it? So, yeah, I think there's definitely something to that. Interesting. But remember, the Niners were in kind of a tough spot because Deebo Samuel was hurt. Brandon Ayuk pulled his hamstring.
Right.
I don't know. Maybe there's no right answer, but whatever they did didn't work. That's fair to say.
Well, one thing, remember the Chris Finke drama with Chase Claypool, where Claypool said how that the 49ers were wearing pads and Claypool said the Steelers haven't worn them since training camp. And look at what the Steelers have been doing. They've had a couple bad injuries, but for the most part, they've remained decently healthy besides Deontay Johnson on offense. And had a lot.
Hey, take him on offer, Leo.
Okay, I'm down.
There you go.
The hammies are struggling. They're struggling.
Thank you, Sean. Appreciate it.
That's why I just wear slippers now.